Well, I am incredibly honored to be here with my friend Talmage Boston, who I've admired since even before I was a practicing lawyer. Talmage has been a lawyer in Dallas since 1978. He's been recognized more times than I can count for not only his incredible legal skills, but his service to the bar. Recently awarded the Dallas History Makers Award for Excellence. He got the Luke Souls Award for Outstanding Service to the Practice of Law in 2022, the Dan Rubley Price Memorial Award for his legal writing, his researching, and his dedication to the practice of law and being a volunteer in so many different ways. He's written 4 books. I haven't read them all, but I've read a couple of them, and they're fantastic. I read his books on baseball way back when, and they're really interesting. His books, for those who would like to see them, and I recommend them all to you, is the latest one is Cross-Examining History. A lawyer gets answers from the experts about our presidents. That has a foreword by another one of my real heroes, Ken Burns. The second one is Raising the Bar, the crucial role of the lawyer in society, a topic near and dear to probably many people who will watch this. And it has a foreword from our former partner, a dear friend of mine, Dick Thornburg, certainly an icon for many of us and somebody whose shoulders we stand on at Canal Gates and beyond. The third book, Baseball and the Baby Boomer, written in 2009, another foreword by Frank DeFord. And then finally, the first book in his series, 1939, Baseball's Tipping Point. And we've had many conversations about history, about baseball. Really, really enjoyed getting to know Talmage more. And I know you will too, because he's a true Renaissance man in our profession, somebody who is interested in a lot of different things and has had the energy to really do them all. He's interviewed countless world leaders, including very recently interviewing Henry Kissinger before he recently passed away. And then I was very pleased to see when I opened the newspaper a couple of days ago, Talmage was honored with writing a beautiful article about Henry Kissinger's memory and his significance to the world in the Dallas Morning News. So Talmage, very, very honored for you to take some time with us today, and welcome to this podcast.
Thanks, Craig. Honored to be on your podcast with you. And as you mentioned, Dick Thornburg, one of my legal heroes and good friends. And so look forward to being part of your program.
Fantastic. So I think let's start with how are you able to kind of manage this passion for history that you have, passion for baseball history, passion for the history of our country and beyond with your legal career? Talk a little bit about what drove you to create this balance that I know would make many of us envious.
Well, I think all of us want to go through life feeling like we have some creative talent. And for some, being a lawyer is an avenue for using your creative talent. For some of us, we get to use our creative talent, but it doesn't quite fill us up, and we look for other avenues. And for me, writing for publication turned out to be that avenue as of 1991 when I wrote my first published piece, and been writing ever since. My 5th book, which you didn't mention, comes out in April 2024. It's another presidential history book called How the Best Did It, Leadership Lessons from Our Top Presidents, and the forwards by CNN political analyst John Avalon, who's wonderful. But I think, I'm not an artist with my hands. I can't play a musical instrument. I was never a great athlete in terms of golf, tennis, or the things that people our age, some people at least, can still do. And I've always loved history. I come from a family of history lovers, and the chance to put my thoughts together and synthesize them and put them on the page and then refine them on the page till it's the best work product that I can turn out. It's just something I enjoy. I think for anybody watching this and you say, how do you do it? Obviously, there's 24 hours in the day and you have to make certain decisions about how you're going to use your time. I don't play golf. I don't fish. I don't hunt. We don't travel the world much. Our kids are grown. But the real key for me is I'm typically asleep by 8:30 p.m. and I get up on or before 5 a.m. So every morning I have 3 hours of total solitude when I can read, I can write, I can prepare my interview questions for all the on-stage interviews I do. And then at 9 o'clock, I put on my lawyer's hat and go to work. Now, that means I don't devote an hour or an hour and a half to exercise every day, which if I did, I'd have a much better physique and I'd weigh less. It's just a matter of sacrifices and how are you going to allocate your schedule? And Greg, you and I both know that being a lawyer, much of the time, there's not a whole lot of affirmation. There is from time to time, but it's rarely on a steady basis. Whereas writing for publication, whether it's a book or writing for Dallas Morning News, in our case, our local newspaper, people read it, they like it, they enjoy it, and that just lifts my spirit. So it's a way to do what I love doing, use my creative juices, and people seem to enjoy it and are nice enough to say nice things about it. And so it's a win-win on all fronts.
Yeah. Well, you lift our spirits, and I'm looking forward to your 5th book coming out. You always leave me with something to think about when you either question these great people. I mean, recently we were in the same room when you questioned David Brooks about his new book, How to Know a Person. And I just loved that. I thought he had so much to share with us. And you brought out so many really interesting nuggets. How do you pick, or how did you start picking the people who were the ones you wanted to focus your writing about, whether it be leadership examples or your lessons for the members of the bar?
Well, I think you just decide who you admire. And so I'm a voracious reader. I keep up with book reviews and, everything that's coming out. And since I've been doing these onstage interviews with authors who are mainly historians now for over 15 years, I know all of them. I keep up with where they are when their next book's coming out. They now know they want to come to Dallas because we're going to have some events where there'll be a lot of people. There'll be a lot of books sold. And so Dallas is now on everybody's short list of where the major authors want to come to promote their books. And I obviously enjoy the conversations, which about 7 years ago, I guess, I decided I needed to record and turn into podcasts, which I've done. And I have a podcast series, Cross-Examining History. So, for example, if anybody wanted to hear the interview I did with David Brooks a month or so ago, you could find it and listen to it and hear David's wisdom. Tomorrow I'm doing a interview with ABC White House correspondent Jonathan Karl on his new book on how Trump has destroyed the Republican Party. And so that'll be up on a podcast. And obviously as a lawyer, I enjoy a trial lawyer interrogating people, preparing how best to ask the questions. Although it's a little bit different, Craig, as you know, when you're a lawyer and you're cross-examining, you're trying to, if it's an adverse witness, really take them down. Whereas my philosophy on interviewing has always been, the crowd didn't come to see me, they came to see David Brooks. And so I want to ask questions that are going to allow him or her to tell their best stories, their best insights, and, make it fun for the audience. They'll want to read the book, they'll tell their friends about it and so forth. So there are some similarities between doing the onstage interviews. Obviously, as a litigator, we do a lot of writing and rewriting to make it as tight as we can make it. And that's certainly what I try to do with my history writing. So there's a lot of interplay between the two main things that I do.
So I want to start. There's so many places to start. I mean, you're in the Texas Baseball Hall of Fame. I do want to get into baseball because that's a passion of both of ours. And we got to celebrate the unknowable in November this year with the Texas Rangers winning the World Series. So we're going to get to baseball and baseball history, which we share a love of. But talk a bit about the great Henry Kissinger. And I know he's in some circles not considered the great Henry Kissinger. Some people are critics of him, but let's focus on I mean, you just interviewed him not that many months ago. I've listened to that interview, which is fabulous. Talk a little bit about what we should know about Henry Kissinger as it relates to what we're all experiencing today in the Middle East. What did Henry Kissinger do that was special?
Well, he found a way to create productive dialogue in the context of negotiating. He found a way to achieve his objectives for the most part. It wasn't always on an expedited timetable, but that's just part of the path of negotiation. Some things just aren't meant to happen as quickly as we wish they would. But nobody knew more history than Henry Kissinger. Nobody knew how better to apply it to today's events and situations. He was interpersonally charming. And that's always a good thing when you're dealing with people in close quarters and trying to. One of my favorite expressions is somebody likes you, they'll give you the benefit of the doubt. They don't like you, they won't. And Henry Kissinger was incredibly likable. He knew how to connect with people such that they would want to have dialogue with him. And so it was really the personal side of him as well as the scholarly part of him that I don't think people appreciated. And in terms of his critics, I just view them as short-sighted, people who didn't grasp the whole picture, people who had no appreciation for what, in fact, was possible as to what was not possible. And so I don't pay a lot of attention to those people because the people who studied his career deeply know that he was as good a strategist as we've ever had, as good a negotiator as we've ever had. And if you've ever read his books, and then he wrote many books, he was a brilliant writer. His sentences were wonderful and wise. And they were not fast reads because they were dense with real substance. But if you took the time, there was so much to be learned from them. His last book, which was the subject of my last interview with him, was on leadership. And I encourage anybody who wants to read a profound book on leadership to pick that up and study it, because there's just, in fact, I wrote an article on leadership for lawyers that ran in the Texas Bar Journal. I also wrote one on negotiating strategies for lawyers, another book on Kissinger, the negotiator, written by 3 professors at Harvard that's brilliant and would teach lawyers who want to learn more about best practices in negotiating. So there's just so much that he was good at, and that for people who take the time to study it, and particularly over the course of 100 years, he stayed productive and brilliant through age 100. How many people do that? So just so many reasons to admire.
I certainly do. And I admire your portrayal of him. The interview you did of him recently is must listen to. That podcast which you did for, I think, the Foreign Affairs Council in Dallas, was incredible. It is amazing to think that a guy 99 and a half at the time, or almost 100, could be that articulate. And boy, do we need him. I mean, between the issues with China and the issues in the Middle East, having somebody who could bridge gaps right now, it would be very, very welcome. I know I read on China when I was embarking on my first trips to China, and it was recommended by one of our great leaders, David Tang, who just stepped down as the managing partner of our Asia region. And to understand that culture, the history of China, and to see it through Henry Kissinger's eyes and what he, as you say, thought he could accomplish, and kind of opened up a lens beyond what most people thought about respect to China.
I think one of the keys to appreciating Kissinger was the fact that he was a realist. People who criticize him probably don't have an appreciation for the reality of the circumstances he faced. And maybe they're idealistic on other fronts that's not necessarily tied to reality. But for people who truly grasped the facts of what he was dealing with, the people he was dealing with, the tension, the discord, the conflict that he was dealing with, and negotiating always from a perspective of, what's possible given the what is, as opposed to the what might be or what I wish it was, blah, blah, blah. He was always anchored in reality.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to take you through a couple more people. You also, one of your heroes is Sandra Day O'Connor, and you reviewed and I believe interviewed as well the author of kind of the seminal biography on Sandra Day O'Connor. Tell us a little bit about what we can learn from that great person who broke barriers and brought her wisdom to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, well, the biography you mentioned is called First. It's written by my friend Evan Thomas. Sandra Day O'Connor spent the last few years of her life battling dementia after her husband had died of that. And so she had never written her final memoir. She'd written a memoir of growing up and so forth, but not really of her time on the Supreme Court or anything like that. And so the family decided they wanted a truly great biographer to dig into it and tell her story since she was no longer able to do it. And they selected Evan Thomas. And so they opened all of her files, introduced him to her entire network. And Evan is a great historian and a straight shooter. And that is a marvelous book. But in reading that book and spending as much time with Evan, and I did meet Sandra Day O'Connor while she was still lucid and came to Texas as part of her big effort to stress the teaching of civics, which is not being taught enough. And that was her big cause after she left the court. I mean, she grew up on a ranch, and her father was a pretty rough character. And anybody who's known somebody who grew up in those circumstances know you have to be pretty tough to survive. But she was obviously a serious reader, a serious student, went to Stanford undergrad, then went to Stanford Law School, entered the job market when nobody was hiring women, even though she was like number 3 in her class at Stanford, and wasn't discouraged by any of that, persevered, found her place in political life in Arizona State Senate, was the majority leader, then became a judge, appellate court, not the Supreme Court, but the Court of Appeals in Arizona. But when President Reagan decided he wanted to have a woman on the Supreme Court, he deferred to his then Chief Justice, William Rehnquist, who had gone to Stanford Law School, and as we know from Evan Thomas's book, not only had dated Sandra O'Connor, but had proposed to her. Anyway, he knew how smart she was. He knew that she'd be able to handle the pressure, strength of character, and so forth. And so she was chosen, and over the course of her 24 years, I think it was, on the court, she became the mediator. She became the peacemaker. She became the fifth swing vote on dozens of important opinions, and was beloved by her fellow justices, by her law clerks, persevered through breast cancer. She, even though had obviously philosophical differences with Ruth Ginsburg, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, they had a very special friendship and admiration for each other. So anybody who succeeds on all those fronts and finds a way to make things work and finds a way to bring people together and is a serious scholar, but also a fun personality. She had a great sense of humor. She was a great golfer. She was a great tennis player. She was a great wife and mother. She and her husband were great dancers. They'd go to these parties in Washington, D.C., and everybody leave the floor just to watch them dance. And, all of her sons grew up and became very successful people. So anybody who does what she did with excellence on so many fronts is somebody to admire. And then, ultimately as sacrificial, she didn't want to step down from the Supreme Court, but her husband with his dementia needed her essentially full-time attention. And she said, well, he sacrificed his career to move with me to DC. He was a very prominent lawyer in Arizona. So it's my time to sacrifice for him. So she stepped down, and not long thereafter, he died. So she actually could have stayed on the court much longer. But anyway, her whole emphasis on civics and and just her legacy of being important in so many ways, on so many fronts, makes me believe she's not sufficiently appreciated for the incredible life she led.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. And I think, some of that goes back to, I agree with you, the toughness, she didn't get distracted by challenges. She took them and used them to her advantage. Very well said. And so the last topic on this line I'd like to ask you about is really focusing on your third book, Raising the Bar. And of course, I think I've shared with you this story, but I had the honor of meeting President George W. Bush one time and just figured I'd be getting a picture with him. It was before a charitable event, and get a picture with him and move on. And before I even could get two steps, he'd obviously been prepped by someone, and he said, "My father says your partner, Dick Thornburg, is the best lawyer in the United States." I happen to agree with him, but I found it a pretty amazing compliment that the 41st president of the United States thought Dick Thornburg was the greatest lawyer in the United States. Talk a little bit about the concept of raising the bar. What does it mean to be a lawyer to you? What are the things, if you're, a lot of folks who listen to these are sometimes younger lawyers and they're thinking about how to make their mark in the profession. Talk a little bit about what they ought to be thinking about.
Well, Craig, you're younger than I am, but I think at the time you entered the profession, I'd probably been practicing about 10 years. Lawyer jokes were the rage. There were all kinds of stories about how greedy lawyers were, how they cared, about themselves and not for their clients, and were responsible for all kinds of lawsuits that didn't seem to serve anybody's interests. So everybody was down on lawyers, and those of us who were trying to do a good job for our clients, trying to believe that we were engaged in an honorable profession, decided that we need to defend ourselves. And to do that, we need to express why what we do is important and is worthy of being praised, not criticized. And so I started writing pieces about lawyers who I greatly admired. Of course, my all-time hero in all fields is Abraham Lincoln, who was a spectacular trial and appellate lawyer in Illinois before he became president. And my other great hero, which some people think is fictionalized, but in fact it's a true portrayal, is Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird, who was really modeled after Harper Lee's father in so many ways. And so I knew that I wanted to write to tell the stories of Lincoln the lawyer, Finch the lawyer, what they had done for their clients, what they had done for their societies, their communities. And then I decided I wanted to write a chapter on recent lawyers. And so I chose, for the most important lawyers of the last 50 years on the litigation side, I picked Leon Jaworski. My uncle, who's one of my great legal mentors, spent his whole career at what's now Norton Rose Fulbright, used to be Fulbright Jaworski. And so, and of course, I'd lived through the Watergate. I'd lived through Jaworski as the lead prosecutor who brought Nixon down and made him resign. And before that had prosecuted Nazi war criminals after World War II, and just, been so important using his incredible litigation skills on so many fronts. And then on the transactional side, there was James Baker. So the fact that they were both Texans was a coincidence, but it opened the door for me to get to interview Secretary Baker the first time, and I've now done it 5 times. And he's on the same level with Henry Kissinger, both, although he's a lawyer and Kissinger's not, but in terms of incredibly successful Secretary of State, negotiator, strategist. Reagan is a highly rated president in large part because Baker was his White House chief of staff his first term, just shrewd in every respect. So reading about Jaworski and Baker, and again, trying to draw lessons from how they practiced law and went about their business that would have application to younger lawyers who aspired to do great things with their careers, was a lot of fun to to write about and open the door to that relationship. And then I wanted to also recognize that lawyers do a lot of things other than practice law that are really important to society. And so I had a chapter on the lawyer as novelist and wrote about my father's favorite novelist, who was Louis Auchincloss, who was a New York silk stocking lawyer, but who wrote these wonderful best-selling novels. And then, of course, John Grisham, who I met through my love of baseball and has become a dear friend over the years, and Richard North Patterson, who became a dear friend. And just the fact that lawyers can use their imagination in ways outside the courtroom, beyond the billable hours, in ways that really elevate and uplift society. And so that became a chapter. And so anyway, it was just an effort to inspire the legal profession to take note of who we are, what we've done, what we can do on multiple fronts. And the State Bar of Texas was the publisher. And as you mentioned, Dick Thornburg, my great mentor, wrote the foreword. In fact, I don't think I've told you this story before, Craig, but for the 2010 State Bar Convention, which in Texas we call the annual meeting, it was the 50th anniversary of the release of To Kill a Mockingbird. And the convention was in Fort Worth. And in those days, I was lining up all the speakers for the convention. So I said, we should have a focus on this convention on Atticus Finch to celebrate the 50-year anniversary. And so I mentioned that to my wife and, who we ought to try to get. And when I mentioned that to her, she went to our bookshelf, she pulled off Dick Thornburg's memoir, she put it on the coffee table and said, that's Atticus Finch.
Yeah.
So we had Dick come and speak, and he was great. And so it's a lot of fun when you can bring those kinds of things together, and again, win-win for everybody.
We circulate these podcasts internally, and unfortunately, a lot of lawyers and members of our staff didn't get a chance to work and get to know Dick Thornburg. Could you do us the honor of describing what you admired about Dick?
Well, Dick and I met through baseball. I went to a national CLE conference put on by a major accounting firm. It was in Phoenix at a elegant resort, and Dick was the keynote speaker, and he gave a dazzling speech. And my wife and I were there, and I'd never heard him speak before. Here was the U.S. Attorney General under President Bush 41 and President Reagan, and so that evening there was a cocktail hour and a dinner, and so I'm waiting in line to get a drink, and I'm standing next to Dick Thornburg. And so we start talking, and the subject of baseball comes up, and my book, 1939, A Baseball's Tipping Point, had recently come out, and lo and behold, his wonderful wife, Jenny, had just given it to him for his birthday. And so we sat down at breakfast the next day, and he said, hey, Talmage, maybe you can help me. My beloved Pittsburgh Pirates are playing in the Hall of Fame game in Cooperstown and over induction weekend, and I've tried everything I know to do to get tickets to the game. And I said, Dick, I'll get them for you, because one of my best friends, Dale Petrosky, who's now the head of the Dallas Chamber, was the president of the Baseball Hall of Fame at the time. And so I called Dale. I said, here's the deal. Dick Thornburg wants to. He said, great. We got it covered. Great. Next thing that happened, the All-Star game was in Pittsburgh. And so Dick hosted me at the Duquesne Club, and he was with Jackie Autry, Gene Autry's widow, and I was with Sharon Robinson, Jackie Robinson's daughter, and we had this wonderful lunch, and went to the game, and so I had him come down and speak to the Dallas Bar Association Business Litigation Section, and arranged for him to throw out the first pitch at the Rangers game that night. We sat at the suite, so we just did a lot of fun things in baseball through the years. And I mean, there's so many reasons to appreciate his greatness, not only as a lawyer, but as a person. But really what stands out to me was his humility, his engagement as if he's just, another person. In fact, when my book, Raising the Bar, came out, he brought me to Pittsburgh. He and Jenny took us to the best restaurant. I spoke to KLA Gates. I spoke at the University of Pittsburgh Law School. I spoke at the Thornburg Center at the University of Pittsburgh. And I tell the story, and if your firm hasn't heard this thing, I have a speech I give called Baseball the nature, the personality, and the power of the game. And I've given it all over the country. And when it comes to the power of the game, one of the two stories I tell is about Dick Thornburg. And that is, as a young lawyer, he was happily married. They had 3 young boys, one of whom was a baby. Nobody was making much money as a lawyer in those days. They only had 1 car. His wife drops him off at the office. She drives away with the 3 boy in the car. And lo and behold, she gets hit by a truck. She's killed, permanent brain damage to the baby. Dick becomes despondent and can't get out of his funk. It's 1960, but lo and behold, his beloved Pittsburgh Pirates get to the World Series. He's there for Game 7. He sees Mazeroski hit the walk-off home run in the 9th. And all of a sudden, he said, you know what? If the Pittsburgh Pirates can win the World Series against the mighty New York Yankees, there's hope for me, there's hope for the world, there's hope for everybody. And he said this in his memoir, that it was a turnaround moment, and how the power of baseball can bring this untapped potential in this young lawyer out of his funk to go on and have the amazing career that he had, governor of Pennsylvania, attorney general of the United States, United Nations, everything that he did. And he always stayed close to his Pirates and baseball. And that's just why in so many ways he was special to me.
Yeah. Thank you. That means a lot.
Did you hear that story, Craig?
I had, through the eyes of our former global managing partner, who told me the story that you probably set up, the dinner with Bill Mazeroski.
Dale Petrosky did. Dale Petrosky did.
Yeah. So he tells that story, and Pete Kalis gave his story, and it kind of goes around the table. It's a one conversation table as he describes it, and it gets to Dick, and he tells the story you just told. And Mazeroski's in tears and says, I've heard a lot of stories about that World Series, and that's the best one I've ever heard, the most impactful story he'd ever heard, which pretty amazing. But you nailed it. I mean, Dick helped me in a lot of ways that little tiny things to him that were massive to us. I mean, we started our Houston office, and he asked me if it'd be helpful to go down and meet the new partners there. And, it took 2 days out to go do stuff like that. You're right. He was humble. He was a servant. He never took himself too seriously. And there was a lot about him to take very seriously. And he was a incredibly wise human being. I mean, I remember vividly walks with him from point A to point B at an event, and just listening to him for 10 minutes, and it's some of the highlights in my legal career. So thank you for sharing that. He's very, very much missed, but not forgotten by any stretch of the imagination. So let's pivot to the great game a little bit. That's a good transition. I mean, you've written a couple of books about the great game. People ask me all the time, they're like, Craig, Cowboys, I get it, basketball, hockey, whatever, I get it. It's physical, if action packed. Why do you like this baseball stuff so much? And, it's hard to dissect, but talk a little bit about your love of the game, how it started, and what led you to write about baseball as a little bit of an analog for the human condition.
Well, I spent my childhood in Houston and was there in 1962 when the Houston Colt 45s entered the National League, the same time the New York Mets did. And of course, 3 years later, they became the Houston Astros. But I had a marvelous Little League experience in Houston. All the churches in our Memorial neighborhood had Little League programs coached by wonderful men. And I was a pretty good Little League player. And I said, I come from a family of history lovers, and the history of baseball has always been better preserved than the history of any other sport. And so you could not only enjoy the game that you were playing or the game that you were watching, but you could read about it, and you didn't have to have a whole lot of imagination to imagine Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and Joe DiMaggio and all these legendary figures. And so that was really my start. And since my last name was Boston, and there was the Boston Red Sox, and as a kid, Ted Williams retired, and that was a big deal. Everybody regarded him as the great hitter he was. And immediately Carl Yastrzemski becomes the left fielder. I'm in the first grade. Carl Yastrzemski is in the starting lineup for the Boston Red Sox for me through grade school, junior high, high school, college, law school, and 5 years of practicing law. 23 consecutive years he's in the state. So he was my guy. And so when he goes into the Hall of Fame in 1989, I mean, I had to be there, Cooperstown. And so it was that whole experience that on the airplane flying back, one of the people who'd been particularly good to me in many ways in baseball was Bobby Brown, who played for the Yankees with DiMaggio and Mantle, and then ultimately became president of the American League after a very distinguished career as a cardiologist in Fort Worth. But Bobby Brown had my wife and me and a couple we were with up to the Grand Hotel and meet all the Hall of Famers. So it was this magical experience. So I'm on the airplane coming back to Dallas. And so I'm writing a thank you note to Bobby Brown for all that he's done. And then I just kind of start riffing on baseball and what it is and why it's so grand. And it was really that inspiration that triggered the first published essay that I ever wrote, which was on Jackie Robinson, who besides Abraham Lincoln is my other great hero. And kind of a lawyer twist on this too. I was involved in a Dallas Bar Association committee in which we adopted a public school. And Dallas was starting out with these charter schools, and one of them was the Law and Government Magnet High School. And Prater Monning, who was at Gardere, and I were heavily involved, and we go speak to the students about law and, courts, and that some of them want to be policemen and get police over there and talk to them. So anyway, Prater calls me one day and says, "Hey, we need somebody to go or speak to the kids at the Magnet High School. Can you go?" And I said, "Yeah, I can go, but you know what? I just don't feel like talking about law." He said, "What do you want to talk about?" I said, "What I really want to talk to him about is Jackie Robinson." He said, "Then go over there and talk to him about Jackie Robinson." So I put together this elaborate speech and seemed to go pretty well. But that was the basis for my first published essay. So again, it's almost a guide thing in terms of you just get these nudges to take you out of your existing comfort zone and do something different that you just feel like you got to do. And then all sorts of good things happen because you do. I can't tell you, if I wasn't this serious baseball fan, I never would have known Dick Thornburg. I never would have known David Brooks. I never would have known John Grisham. I never would have known Supreme Court Justice Sam Alito, who's an incredible baseball fan, who he had. Harriet Myers and I were sitting around talking about the 2013 State Bar Convention here. Who's going to be our keynote speaker? We started talking about Supreme Court. I said, well, I don't think Justice Alito's ever given a speech in Texas since he went on the court. He said, "Oh, Talmage, he's the most fanatical baseball fan. You got to send him your books." And I'd already looked at when the State Bar Convention was, and I'd looked at the Ranger schedule. I said, "Harriet, you tell Justice Alito that if he comes down and he's our keynote speaker, I will arrange for him to throw out the first pitch at the Rangers game." So a week later, Harriet calls me and says, "He's accepted on that condition." So he came down, he threw out the first pitch. We're down there in the dugout beforehand. Kevin Sherrington writes it over the sports page of the Dallas Morning News. We, the next year, do a talking baseball program on C-SPAN that you can still pull up and watch with David Brooks and George Will and Christine Brown from USA Today and Tim Kirchhoff from ESPN. So all because of baseball. And when the program was over in D.C., Justice Alito said, "Here, come. I want you to come to my chambers in the Supreme Court. I want to show you all my baseball memorabilia." And so we do that. And then, so it's just the friendships, the relationships. I don't know if that happens in the other sports, but I know it sure happens in baseball because, as you know, Craig, I know what a passionate fan you are. When you're at a baseball game, we now have pitch clocks, which I think are great, but historically you didn't need pitch clocks until all this batting gloves and all this multiple change of pitchers that slowed down the game so dramatically. But it was a game where you could have a really good conversation on what's going on the field, about life, and just develop a rapport as a fan watching the game at a leisurely pace compared to a fast-paced basketball game or football against the clock, hockey against the clock. So there's something that lends itself to sociability and relationships, and of course, father-son generation, pass it down, playing catch with your dad, the whole deal, that I don't think you have with any other sport.
No, that was a beautiful story. I don't know if you know that his kid sister Rosemary is in leadership that I've been fortunate enough to serve with for 15 years. She's the head of our labor and employment workplace safety group, and can't wait to show her this podcast because she's going to get a kick out of that story. She might know about it, but I didn't. It wasn't on my radar when that all happened. So, and I didn't happen to be at that game, but I wish I had been. I mean, the boys and I don't know if I've talked to you about this, but we went to Houston for game 1 of the ALCS. We went to games 4 and 5 in Arizona. And Jamie Newberg, who of course you know, and who, for those who don't, writes about the Rangers, but also practices law, a bit of a Renaissance man like you, a little bit different focus. But he wrote a beautiful piece. I don't know if you saw it, about how, it was a picture of him that somebody took when Spurs pitches the final pitch in game 5 and we win it. And he's like kind of slumped down. I have a picture of Mike Budner after he won the Stanley Cup in '99 in my office, where he's kind of slumped over his, it's that what like leaves your system, the adrenaline. And he talked about the tears flowing and this, that, and the other. And I remember thinking I was kind of disappointed in myself that when the Rangers finally won, after I've been watching them since I was 8 years old and scoring the games at my grandmother's feet while she smoked cigarettes, I was thinking, why didn't I tear up? And then I get on the airplane, I read Jamie Newberg's piece, and I start tearing up, and I start riffing like you did on the way back from the Hall of Fame thing to my boys about the experience, because they were both with me. And there is something about the game of baseball that allows you to fall in love. It's you're right. It's not timed, and it has a cadence that allows you to talk about the players, really see them over the course of, many months of playing every single day, with a lot of opportunities for failure and how they deal with that failure. And it's got wonderful, wonderful lessons for all of us. So enough about me, because you're too good. I want more on you. Tell me a little bit about we all know, about Jackie Robinson, but what was the thing that made him a hero?
Well, to me, the way that he accepted Branch Rickey's terms, and if you've seen the movie 42, or if you've read books about him or whatever, that Branch Rickey said, I want to sign you to a contract and let you be the trailblazer, but there's going to be a whole lot of hostility thrown your way, and you're going to have to deal with it, because if you can't, you'll never succeed. And Robinson said, hey, I'm a strong guy. I know how to deal with hostility. He's a great football player, and I know how to fight back. And Rickey said, you can't fight back, because if you fight back, you're going to lose. You'll be out of the game. You're going to have to turn the other cheek and absorb a lot of stuff that's going to be hateful and unpleasant, and who knows how bad it's going to be, but it's going to be there. We know that. And Robinson's willingness to accept those terms and deal with it for both the 1947 and the 1948 seasons, before the 49 season, Rickey said, okay, you proved it. You're fine. Play the way you want. I'm removing that restriction. And he turned Robinson loose, and Robinson proceeds to go out and have his greatest year, wins the most valuable player award, leads the league in RBIs, just fulfills his ultimate potential in that year. So anybody who can deal with those kinds of circumstances and be as strong in persevering through them, while still doing something that you and I both know is incredibly difficult, which is to be a Major League ball player, as a hitter, as an infielder, in every respect. So, the fact that Robinson didn't get to the big leagues till his late 20s, he only had a 10-year Major League because of that, but, lifetime over 300 hitter. The ultimate mark of the great ball player is they're winners. And almost every year Robinson was the Dodgers, they're in the World Series, same way as DiMaggio was, Mantle was, Ruth Gehrig were. Those guys just all seemed to lead their teams to the World Series, and Robinson was the vital cog. But then after he retired from baseball, he became a champion for civil rights. He was very confrontational of both Nixon and Kennedy in the 1960 election for their unwillingness to be stronger on the need for civil rights. When he got inducted into the Hall of Fame, in his speech, talked about how we needed to have black managers. His last public appearance before his untimely death at age 53 at the World Series, where he says, I'll feel a lot better when I see blacks in the manager and on coaching. And so just a trailblazer in so many respects, very intelligent guy, passionate guy, just persevered through incredible adversity his entire life, and is somebody who I think is worthy of knowing the particulars of his life's story, because I think it's so inspirational.
I hear a theme. I hear the theme of these people who are your heroes, and I share this admiration, are people who kind of have stuff thrown at them, but it doesn't take them off their course. They may have conditions imposed by things they don't control, but they fight through it. And, it's probably why you're such a great litigator as well, because there are plenty of opportunities to get distracted, but you study all these people who rise above those distractions and limitations. So,
who I admire.
Yeah, I do too. So I've got two last questions for you, because I could probably take up your entire afternoon, and I don't think that'd be fair to you. One is, if you were talking to Ben Budner, who's a second-year law student at the University of Texas, and you were advising him on how to chart, or one of his peers on how to chart a wonderful and rich career like you've had, what would you tell him? And the last question is, I want a book recommendation that folks ought to read, because I'm going to ask you if you'd be willing to come on again after you publish the book in a few months, and we can hopefully promote that a bit. But those are, you can object compound question and I'll restate, but
let's take one at a time. What would I tell your son? I'm glad I spent my career in civil law. I'm happy with where it's come out, because in terms of, my happiest clients are those who I can achieve resolution quickly for. That's when the litigator is a hero, not when you win the big jury trial after 3 years and you're charged an arm and a leg, and if you win, the other side's going to appeal. Then you got another 18 months of uncertainty with the appellate court, and on and on and on. But when you get it closed and settled, and they can live with it, they can get back to their business and do what they want to do, and not give depositions, not pull documents, and do all that stuff, you feel like you've done something good.
Yeah.
So anyway,
creating value is a key for sure.
Yeah. And so then in terms of a book to read, you've mentioned, David Brooks is the on the importance of what it takes to be successful in your relationships. I think has application across the board, because relationships are a key to anything you do in any endeavor, and to be really good at it in terms of having reciprocal friendships where you're listening, you're empathizing, you're accompanying down, life's difficult paths. I think is something that is worthy of deep thought and reflection, and rethinking how you go about your business and the many different relationships you have. So that's the one that comes to mind first on my list of important books.
Yeah, I'm giving it away at a feverish pace over the holidays. It is absolutely, and I think it's why probably you and I are interested in doing what we do. We want to not just know the taglines on these stories, but as you've done with some of the great people in our history, understanding the deconstructing the story a bit to see how the cocktail was made to create these great people is so important. especially as we think about applying those lessons to our own lives. So I think that's wonderful. I totally agree with you on litigation. I think you have to have a value creation framework, big, little firm, whichever kind of firm you go to, and you're not going to get jury trials unless you do cases on contingency fees. Or we have some lawyers in our firm that do a lot, but they're in that toxic tort, or class action defense docket that the cases just kind of have to be tried. But great advice, and I look forward to seeing your new book, and then we'll schedule, I hope, a time for us to visit again if you're willing to do it.
One story I haven't told real quick before we go off is baseball. Yeah. Your father and I met through our mutual love for Theodore Roosevelt. And when he learned, that I was writing about baseball, he came to my office. We had lunch one day, and he brought me pictures of Connie Mack and told me about, the whole Philadelphia Ace deal and his childhood and all this. So again, that's the kind of things that happen when you're a baseball fan.
Yeah, no, thank you. That collage is sitting right here. Kind of, you can see the edge of it. No, he was certainly, I patterned a lot of my interests after my dad, and I know he admired you, and it's part of the reason why even before I was a lawyer, I admired you. I love your ability to be a very serious lawyer while making sure that you keep grounded in other things that enrich all of us. And I just want to say, you run a society that I attend frequently to hear these great authors who come to Dallas and wouldn't if it weren't for you. You're not going to say that, but everybody should know it. And you're really a treasure to the profession. You represent us in so many wonderful ways, and you enrich us and make us think and make us challenge our assumptions. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for being on this.
Well, Craig, I really enjoyed it. I'm a great admirer of yours, and I like to follow you on LinkedIn because you're doing all kinds of great things on your own. So I wish you continued success as well.
Thank you, my friend.